It's April 22nd, 2022. I'm Sonatina, and this is Linguistics You Can Use. You caught me reading my dictionary. Disambiguate. Verb. To remove ambiguity. Disambiguation. Noun. Well, guess we better disambiguate ambiguity, eh? Ambiguity. Noun. The quality of having more than one meaning. An idea, statement, or expression capable of being understood in more than one sense. Isn't that just the description of life? Oh, and disambiguation. It's a fun concept, don't you think? That's what we're going to talk about on today's episode. Now, just a small warning before we continue. Uh, Learning how we use language can set you up for a perspective others are oblivious to. And once you have this knowledge, there's no going back. So, warning. We are studying the meaning of disambiguation. So, let's do some disambiguation by separating the literal definition of a word from how word is literally used. Okay. It's going to hang out there for a bit. So, doing settings. You know how it is on the live stream. Okay. So, the definition of disambiguation. It's to remove ambiguity. And ambiguity is the condition where one thing can be confused for another. Lesson done, right? We know what disambiguation means. Except we all know that words mean more than what a dictionary might say. Disambiguation is the process of communicating. Or perhaps communication is the process of disambiguation? Am I just being semantic? Yes. Semantics is the discipline of making meaning. When words mean more than one thing, it's challenging to know what meaning is being used. I've only been talking about one word. And even at this point, when we get into phrases, it becomes even more of a challenge. There are some technical terms you might want to be familiar with as we discuss these things, such as hominin, polysemy, syntax, and syntactic ambiguity, combining some terms in there. So this is the part where we define the concepts we're going to delve deeper into. What is the relationship? What is the relationship between these concepts. So I was like, I'm trying to be like cool and get my stuff all ready, and then, okay. Huh. I feel like somehow in my transferring of my uh, prepared stuff, it got all mixed up. So let's talk about these concepts. Uh, Words get confused for each other all the time. That's kind of like the nature of language, right? When I say sea, what comes into your mind? Am I referring to a body of water? The term we use for what our eyes can do? Maybe I'm speaking Spanish. And even then, am I agreeing with you or starting a conditional sentence? Hominin is the sound, one sound, individual words that are confusing because they sound the same. Like, and we always start with spoken language because that's where anyone who speaks a language speaks a language, right? I'm dealing with sound. And when sounds are written down, we use symbols, and we turn those symbols into words, collection of symbols, and these symbols are confused for each other all the time because they look the same. And we get polysemes, where many forms has many meanings. Many forms meaning. Many forms meaning. And without context, if I write the word plant, Plant, am I talking about a thing that grows? A person who hides in groups as a kind of spy, right? It can shift this word based on the situation that people are using it in. Maybe an actual plant is a spy. I like to think that, I mean, people put bugs in plants all the time, right? Like bugs, i.e., little devices to listen, not the insects that also live in plants. See, language is just so ambiguous. And since we don't know what words by themselves most of the time mean, the term linguists use for when a collection of words, a phrase, is ambiguous, we use syntactic ambiguity. Syntax, coming from our fabulous friends in ancient Greece, syn and taxis, together, ordering together. So syntax is just a technical way of saying sentence structure. Fun. The fun with language never ends. As you can see, you can go from ambiguous to disambiguous by adding a word or by taking a word away. You can clarify a sentence. You can make words confusing all over the place. Now, real quick, do you want to see one of the most adorable terms you may ever encounter in the scientific field? I think you do. Let us look at this fabulous term, parse tree. This is what linguists call a group. Oh, parse tree is what linguists call a single thing, and then they call a whole thing a parse forest. And isn't that just adorable? A parse forest. So what is a parse tree? Well, as we see here from our fabulous friend Wikipedia, sentences, phrases, are made up of individual words that can play many parts of a sentence. So as we're going through this page, we see here, they give us the example of John hit the ball. Playing a game, baseball, the season started. Go Mariners. So in this parse tree, we see how each element of this sentence comes together. And as we go deeper into linguistics, we start to see how parse trees can be different and all of that. See, this is how, when I'm not following my my prepared notes. But yeah, a phrase can have a few different meanings, and the tools that we use to make it clear which meaning we intend can vary. We can use tone of speech, speed of speech, or in written form, parenthetical statements, footnotes. And the perception of that meaning depends on the way the person who gets the message receives it. Every time we attempt to communicate, we are like musicians, improvising a tune to convey ineffable thoughts, our minds using the instruments available to us, voice and body, while simultaneously interpreting the tunes of those around us in order to find a good sync. Did you realize what a good improvisational musician you are? And thus, we are to our word for today, disambiguation. When we try to resolve syntactic ambiguity, we engage in disambiguation. And you already do. Every day, multiple times a day, likely multiple times already during this video. We're exploring the meaning of this word in English, but this word is just one among many expressing this idea in human languages. And when someone's using this particular word, disambiguation, in English, with their first language is German, will they have a different understanding of the concept than someone whose first language is French, which that language uses a totally kind of different concept, disambiguation. Let's see. Did I pull that up? I did not. Why didn't I pull that up? Well, I didn't pull it up. So maybe you'll see in the show notes. So the Spanish Wikipedia page uses disambiguation, like English. French just uses hominin, and German has Begriffsklärung, which, if you know how German loves compounds, basically means terms clarification. And that sounds more positive than just being the negative of mehrdeutig, which is what the literal translation of ambiguity is. So how do we figure out what a word means? Well, one way is to go into history. So let's see where this word came from. Where did this word come from? How are we using it now? Where does it look like it's developing? Well, I need to do a little exploration of ambiguity. The history of clarification before disambiguation as a word came into being. There was a dude named George Bentham who decided to use this term. And who is this dude? Well, let us go into history. Now, just one note. I almost forgot. I made a note about referencing one of our fabulous linguistic forebears, elders, linguistic gramps is what I like to think of it sometimes, David Crystal. And he says, quote, "One thing to avoid is the etymological fallacy, the view that an earlier meaning of a word or its original meaning is the true or correct one. It is commonly heard in arguments when people appeal to what a word once meant in order to justify their position. When Sigmund Freud was investigating hysteria, he encountered resistance from his colleagues who argued that because the term hysteria derived from the Greek word for womb, the concept of male hysteria was a contradiction in terms. This argument is fallacious because it ignores semantic change. Most words have experienced several changes in meaning throughout their history, so it is impossible to say which stage in their meaning is the true meaning. And if we attempt to go back to the beginning, we find it impossible. For the original history of most words is quite lost." Thank you, David Crystal, from the wonderful book that I have on my shelf, How Language Works. Check it out, maybe. So the whole point of this exploration of disambiguation, the crux of this piece, as it were, we need this word now because we're engaged in this activity more than we were in the past. Before we could have disambiguation, we had to have a lot of ambiguity and much ambiguation. So now I'm going to get into this George Bentham dude. So who is this guy? Well, he apparently was a botanist in the 1800s. And there are many ways to make a word into its opposite. In English, we often use prefixes and suffixes to create a new term or redefine or expand the definition of an old word. Disambiguation is fairly new in English, and the first mention I could find was from 1827 in Outline of a New System of Logic with a critical examination. Oops. Oh, no. It didn't work. Oh, no, that's right, because I did that way. Oh, Donna. So let us wonder. Haha, yes, this is actually what I will not show you anyway. So, Outline of a New System of Logic with critical examination of Dr. Whately's Element of Logic by George Bentham, Esquire, London. A renowned botanist in his time and logician, as you see. He took after his mother, also a renowned botanist of her time, Mary Sophia Bentham. And this book, Outline of a New System of Logic, is basically a diss track of this Elements of Logic by Dr. Whatley. And Bentham is having a lot of fun showing what an idiot he thinks Dr. Whatley is on this subject. So, we have, these are all scanning, scanning. We want to make sure that we're doing stuff. So, let's check out what this whole thing is about. So, prefixing ambiguous with un had been the clear preference among English speakers going back at least a few hundred years, well before Bentham chose to prefix ambiguation with dis. His choice makes sense if you consider he was likely in the throes of a fashion that, hearkening back to Greek or Latin when you spell a word, is the more correct way of spelling a word. This is how we got that silent B in debt. Since ambiguous goes back to Latin, it makes sense he would choose this prefix instead of un, despite him using unambiguous. Ever since, the term has been disambiguation, not unambiguation, which would mean the same thing, removing ambiguity. And with the increasing popularity of disambiguation, disambiguous may overtake unambiguous as it's already being used more and more in technical texts from research I did. So, this concept of disambiguation, of course, is much, much older than 1827. Philosophers of every culture have discussed the need to be clear in your speech. And throughout time, people have used techniques to make things more or less ambiguous based on various intentions. After all, thesauruses wouldn't exist if only one word defined an idea. So, can a dictionary truly help us disambiguate a word? I referenced my dictionary at the start, and yet to say, we should go with that definition. Are you aware that this dictionary is from the 90s and it might have this disambiguation word may have changed in the 20 or so years that since this book was published? We could go onto the internet and see if there's a current version of it, yet language changes every day. So who's to say that even if we went onto there, when you're watching this, it would still mean the same thing? It's always good to still make time points, right? That's how, after all, we do the study of language. Even famous dictionary writer Samuel Johnson quickly realized that the futility of attempting to fix, stabilize the definition or really any aspect of the English language, just such a fool's errand. There's a desire in us, and a lot of us, to seek a source of authority on certain topics. And, not all of us might seek authority on the same topics. But language is definitely one where a lot of people like to rely on an external authority that says this is the right, this is wrong. And of course, as everything, this is both the product of nature and nurture. We want to fit in, that desire to fit in, to be part of the group. It's overwhelming. We are social creatures, and our success as a species is due to our ability to cooperate in groups. This can't help but come up in regards to language, right? The modern tools that we use for disambiguation are not novel. The Urban Dictionary lives in the furrows dug by our word-obsessed ancestors. What has changed is the understanding of who has the authority to define. The proliferation of authoritative sources is where we need to turn our efforts in this era, where anyone can hang their blog shingle to claim authority, to determine what the people we are receiving information from are really saying. What a definition of a word or concept is someone using? Is there a vastly different pronunciation between you and another person that creates challenges? A great source of confusion I personally encounter in my daily life due to my perfection and lackadaisical casual speech patterns. I just, kind of mumble sometimes. People have a hard time understanding me. The way we use language has an impact on the world, reflecting it and creating it at the same time. The power to decide what a term means used to be relegated to a select few, mostly self-chosen. And now the understanding is that everyone has the ability and right to define the world. We engage in more disambiguation every day. The old cultural expectations that everyone had a common frame of reference is falling away. We're more aware and willing to acknowledge others' experiences as valid and needing to be able to discern sea lioning from legit confusion is a very important skill to develop. And we'll talk about that sea lion term in a bit. The way we use language is very personal, and it's important to keep in mind the individual you are attempting to communicate with, so as not to get trapped by unintentional ambiguities. With the rise of Wikipedia, some words appear in a language all of a sudden. There's a concept needing a term, like emoji. Others take their time establishing themselves. And disambiguation stayed in the academic realm for the majority of its existence. Actually, I can do a quick search and pull up a fun little word diagram of disambiguation. Of course, then, the academic, while disambiguation, did stay within the academic realm for a long time, Wikipedia all of a sudden made it burst into the mainstream. Now, it's not the first online encyclopedia, but it's quite the most popular. And popularity means it has influenced culture in a lot of ways. And while I couldn't find the while I couldn't find the what I wanted to about the other thing, I did look up a little thing, and I wanted to share. So we have here the page on Wikipedia for plant disambiguation. And this search page, if you search for a term and end up on a page like this, it's the first time you probably have come across this word. And while at first you might think, what is that? It doesn't take long to realize what you're looking at. And the fact is, this word feels like it was just waiting to be discovered by the general population. To help with a future steeped in more ambiguity than our predecessors could ever know. Our ancestors may have been surprised by the weather of the day, right? But cultures were so local that there wasn't as much ambiguity in language or behavior. People generally knew what words referred to because there wasn't a lot of stuff people referenced. Only a small percent ever left their home environment. And even when they left home, they still tended to stay in the same culture, like religious pilgrims. When we interact with people who grew up in different cultures every day, in every aspect of our life, this term suddenly becomes a lot more relevant. This word was just doing its thing in its niche area, and suddenly it was relevant. And so familiar to a much wider range of people. And so, as it becomes a more known word, it also becomes the stuff of memes. Here we see the disambiguation chart for Macron. Which version of Macron are we talking about? Well, There we go. So we see here how when terms become popular, when terms become popular, when the popular culture, when the general population, general, that's what I was trying to figure out. When it breaks out of its niche area, it becomes a meme. It becomes a way for us to understand our culture. And disambiguation is becoming much, much more a part of our culture. So, why should you care? You know? I mean, what's the use of learning all this abstract stuff about language, is what I mean, right? And, you know, as I was saying, language shapes our reality. The way we use language has the potential to influence topics such as entertainment and politics, religion, and any subject that uses language. And that's pretty much all of them. Studying how we use language in reality is the realm of pragmatics. Now, you may be familiar with the term code switching and can even point to moments you've engaged in it. This is a kind of instinctual pragmatics. You can feel there is a better way to express yourself in a particular circumstance, and so you make sure your language comes out as close to that as possible. You are always assessing, even when you're not really conscious of it, you're always assessing how to most effectively communicate with others, with the person, people right in front of you. And we do need to define effective communication because, like everything, this will mean different things to different people. Subconsciously, and often consciously, you have a goal in a conversation. Perhaps you say your goal is to share ideas with another person. That's it, just sharing. The other person in that conversation might be in it to accomplish a specific task and is getting frustrated that just can't get to the point. And already we have a chance at miscommunication. So, in our conversation, we're going to say effective communication is when the person feels their goal has been met. And this is so simplified. People react differently to ambiguity. And how our society increases or decreases our ability to disambiguate or discern the reality of a situation. How does our society influence us in that way? What attitude or behaviors does society encourage when a situation is ambiguous? It's interesting to think about the situations where you are walking down the street and somebody's walking towards you. I've used no terms, no data points of any kind to describe this person. But some people are going to have this instant, wait, am I in danger? Some people are going to keep waiting. Somebody's walking towards you down the street. Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Is this person, bigger than me, smaller than me? There's a lot of things that weren't in there. And yet, just with that little thing, there was a lot of interpretation and already a way to, misunderstand meaning with each other. Language, it's wacky. I have to say, it's a wacky thing. I thought I prepared more stuff and then I didn't actually get it up in time. But there are a lot of ways that society conditions us to act when we are in a disambiguous, or we are in an ambiguous situation. So we feel sometimes, right, that we are encouraged to be wary, to be fearful, to be afraid, because it is natural in our species history. The danger came from people outside mostly. But did it really? Because honestly, most people interact with the people who are around them all the time, right? Most people are uh, victims, and this is true. People are victims, but most people suffer violence from people they know because that's who you're around most of the time. And as statistics will always tell us, we need to remember that uh, the more you're around somebody, the more likely that something bad might happen. Also, something good might happen. Just stuff happens when you're around the same people. So we look at how our society tells us that we, you know, should interact with a situation. And honestly, in the society that I'm growing up in right now, or growing up in, well, living in, yeah, growing up. I mean, we're all growing up. Um, it means that you're supposed to be afraid. Your instinct, your first thought is supposed to be fear of a stranger versus potentially that person is just another person in the community. And there's no fear to be had or anything like that. So it takes work to tease out these nuances. And the truth is, we can only convince ourselves of something, right? Others can influence us. They can influence our thoughts and they can direct our beliefs in a particular direction. But the acceptance of a truth can only happen in an individual's mind. And this process happens from the moment we have thoughts. We have been reacting to the world around us as we grew by accepting or rejecting what was presented to us as reality. When you know others are working hard to manipulate you with their words, you might start to think about how important it is to know how that manipulation happens and set yourself up for an indoctrination inoculation. Why not? Linguistically speaking, pragmatics can be very useful for this. So, those who know how to use language to influence others have the ability to impose their vision of the world onto others. Being aware of these methods and techniques helps you become a more effective communicator, and it helps you assess a situation more deeply with more discernment. Right? Where ambiguity comes from determines how it should be disambiguated. Right? Here are the questions that pop into my mind when listening to someone trying to convince me of something. Right? Here's a quick list. What are you trying to get me to believe? Why are you reacting to my ideas the way you are? Now, this is often easier when someone's disagreeing or criticizing or introducing a new concept that they want me to adopt, right? When I feel flattered because someone is agreeing with me, it takes more work to make myself process that comment critically. It is a skill, though, and it can be trained and strengthened, as any skill can be. In fact, this trait is one of the ways professional manipulators get you to agree with them. Some people cling to order, familiarity, more than others. And these people may be less inclined to accept ambiguity. To know where someone's resistance to acknowledging a situation is full of ambiguity, the easier it is to know how to communicate with them. Right? So if somebody's resisting letting nuance into a conversation, letting ambiguity into a conversation, it's important to figure out what nuance, what ambiguity are they really fearing, right? It's not going to be easy necessarily, right? Though you may find you have a better understanding of why there doesn't seem to be a connection possible with some people. Happens. Why do some people resist ambiguousness? People who refuse to accept nuance in a situation, like subjects like abortion, gender, sexuality, right? They want to create a reality where things are yes or no. The world must be one or the other, good or bad, going to hell, going to paradise. Because confronting ambiguity can be terrifying. Ambiguity tolerance is not natural for everyone. That's the term, the authoritative term, people who work in this area have given this phenomenon. To put it in a different way, a lawyer's career is pretty much all about creating ambiguity in other people's minds for the benefit of their client, right? Now, is this a practice that you would want to engage in to make your career? Or are you more interested in changing the system so different systems decide the rules we live by? There's a lot of ways that ambiguity comes into our life. And so we have to develop these ideas. And I'm very happy that you joined me for these, journeys in the ether of our language. So, here we go. I put too much into my notes this week. Usually I put too little, and this week I took too much. It's amazing how, I'll find a balance one of these days. But here's where I'm going to bring it down, right? Disambiguation is the process of finding clarity, finding understanding in a situation. What really am I trying to express? And questions that would be useful to ask yourself when you're going through this process of trying to disambiguate a situation. Think, what does your brain want to see? What does your brain want to hear? One of the things when dealing with language is that we have to determine what sense is being activated so we know what's involved in making meaning. There are a lot of different aspects to how our physical body uses language or creates language. And so we always have to come back to ourselves. When my brain was developing, what patterns were implemented so that those are the easy paths? And do I want to keep going down those paths? Or would I prefer I went a different path? Could I be more accepting? These are the questions. These are the questions that it can be useful to ask oneself. So, once again, I would like to say thank you for joining me for another week of our fabulous exploration of language. I think that's all the linguistics you can use for this week. I am once again Sonatina, and I hope this exploration of disambiguation helps you get out there, have a more clear and easier time crafting sound meaning. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Now, remember, if you have any notes, comments, or you want to hear more about a specific area of language, explore, let me know. Make a comment down below. Send me a message. Yeah, I will see you on the internets. Bye.